In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues of the many fields of knowledge, all are steps on the path of omniscience. May these arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O Manjushri, please accomplish this. Good evening and welcome. Nice to see all of you. So today we continue our exploration of the text distinguishing phenomena from their intrinsic nature, Maitreya's Dharma Dharmata Vibhanga, which presents a thoroughgoing and profound explanation of the process of transformation from sentient being to Buddha. And this framework of the transformation is discussed in many different Mahayana sutras and related sources. And there's a huge range of variation in how it's, well, not a huge range. There's a variation in the range of how this transformation occurs, from ranging on the one side or one extreme from a change of one thing into another thing, and then on the other side, no change, but just a clearing away of obstructions or obstructions, phenomena that obstructed the experience of the true nature of that foundation. The clouds dispelling into thin air, dispersing, dissolving, and the sun beaming through that was always there. So, sort of interesting to see how various texts, various authors, various periods of Buddhism address this transformation. How does enlightenment happen? What happens when we achieve enlightenment? And so the reading for tonight was a continuation of this introduction by Karl Brunholzl to his book, Mining for Wisdom Within Delusion, using the old mining analogy. And now we're on page 82 of that text, which was distributed to you in various versions of source books and separate texts, most recently in a separate email where I made a considerably better version of it than before. Let's see, what would it have been called? Reading Reminder.
Sorry, what page did you say we were on?
In the book, we're on page 82. And so this is DDV. Do folks have that? Do they need it again? You want me to show it on screen? What's the easiest? You guys got it? Morgan, do you need it? Do you want me to resend? It was an email uh, dated Thursday, October 3rd at 11:03 p.m. Reading reminder. Ashraya Parivritti. So Ashraya is the foundation. Parivritti is the turning about. Vritti means turning, and pari means completely or fully. So a fully turning about in the foundation or the basis. Is there anybody that doesn't have this reading in front of them that would like to have it? Okie doke. As mentioned above, the description of the fundamental change in this text represents the most detailed discussion of this topic in Buddhist literature. However, interestingly and somewhat ironically, despite that fact, the explanations in this text, Dharma Dharmatava Bhanga, are usually not referred to in other works that discuss the notion of this fundamental change. And that may be due to the fact that it was supposedly hidden for centuries inside a stupa. They were they were building a temple, and somebody was reading the book while they were working, and they dropped it into the pillar, and somebody else closed up the pillar, and it got lost for centuries. Imagine that. The only copy of the book. That's a little bit of an exaggeration on, like, my dog ate my homework. Anyway,
Sounds
in the
like they
Dharma,
didn't want to get caught plagiarizing.
for once, in the Dharma Dharmatava Bhanga, the notion on page 83, the top, the notion of fundamental change is explained through the 10 points. So that's the heart of this text. If we look at the outline of this text, just briefly. So we have the introductory material, we have the brief presentation, samsara nirvana, there's phenomena, and there's intrinsic nature. And those phenomena are presented in 6 points. The rationale for the characterization of phenomena and their nature, and the discussion of whether they're the same or different, what is the abode or basis of phenomena, and phenomena that are in common and those that are not refers to the experience of sentient beings as inhabiting a similar environment that's in common with each other, but having their own mind streams of karmic activity and latent tendencies that is not in common with others. And then the uh, ultimate truth of the non-existence of apprehender and apprehended, and then the explanation of the intrinsic nature in 6 points. Similarly, the characteristics, the basis, ascertainment is the path of joining, preparation. Second path is sort of bringing the nature of reality into focus. Contact is direct experience, non-conceptual experience, i.e. the path of seeing. Recollection, the path of familiarization or meditation, constantly bringing that basic nature, that fundamental ultimate nature to mind and blending it with the experience of post-meditation. And then the final transformation. What is that fundamental transformation in 10 topics? Its nature, essence, the entity or the substance of the transformation, the individuals that experience the transformation, the distinct features of that transformation, the requirements for the transformation, and then the basis. What is the basis for the transformation, which is an enigmatic term. Like, what do they mean, the basis? And I go through these two schemes of 4. There's 4 focal points: relinquishment, application, characteristics, and benefits. Again, not clear quite what they're talking about. And then sort of 4 stages of that transformation: understanding the remedies for defilements or confusion, the nature of the characteristics of phenomena and reality, their distinctions, and their activity, their function. And then, based upon that, directing the mind towards reality incorrectly, correctly, and then the progression in that, and then the actual application of bringing the mind into reality, or uh, 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 applying or accomplishing the turning about, the flaws one might encounter during that, and then the benefits of having done it. So, um, that was a different translation from Carl's. Carl is explained through 10 points: nature, substance, or entity. Its nature. So the nature of fundamental change, its entity or substance. The persons who undergo the change are three yana, the three actors in the stage of Buddhism: Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhism, Bodhisattvas, the distinctive features, the three Buddhakayas with their respective qualities and activities, and then the prerequisites, previous aspiration prayers. So, this being the traditional version, like making aspiration prayers. For us, this would be like wanting to not be in suffering and confusion all the time in our lives. The Mahayana teachings as the focal object, understanding the Dharma, understanding the path, understanding the practice, the training, and the 10 bhumis, actually putting the practice, the technique into practice, both in formal meditation and in our daily life. And then its foundation, non-conceptual wisdom, appears as the major theme in the transformation, a key aspect of it. And we'll have a whole section of reading on that. The mental engagement that leads to it, which are 4 yogic practices that we'll come to. Sounds like the more interesting part of things. The trainings to accomplish it are the 5 paths, the shortcomings of there being no fundamental change if one doesn't apply oneself, and the benefits of there being this change. The most important ones among these 10 points are 1, the nature; 2, its substance or entity; and 6, its foundation, non-conceptual wisdom. The nature of the fundamental change, number 1, is that pure suchness directly appears in a complete manner, while its adventitious stains no longer appear. It would seem like that's the result of the change, but the nature of the fundamental change is pure. That pure suchness directly appears in a complete manner. So that's the nature of the change, and that is the result of the change. The entity of the fundamental change is that mind appearing as the outer world, mind appearing as the beings in it, and the Dharma Dhatu in the scriptures, or as described in certain texts of the Buddhists, are all revealed as nothing but pure suchness. All of these 3 things. That's the entity of the fundamental change, is suchness. The foundation or support, ashraya, of the fundamental change is non-conceptual wisdom that is free from the duality of apprehender and apprehended. Vasubandhu comments on these 3 that everything as an object is nothing but this suchness. So I had to read that sentence a few times to figure out the grammar of it, but I think I finally got it. That everything is an object as nothing but, so everything is an object, and that object is nothing but this suchness. How's that? That everything which is an object of a perceiver, presumably. So everything that is observable is nothing but suchness, and that is called arriving at its nature, which is the suchness that was identified in point 1. is the perfection of the fundamental change, because suchness has the nature of this fundamental change. So this fundamental change is the nature of suchness, ta ta ta. Since there are already certain degrees of change during the phases of the path of seeing, and so on, also here the perfection of this fundamental change is taught, because the stains have been relinquished without exception. The nature of the fundamental change refers to suchness having become stainless in terms of adventitious stains not appearing, and in terms of nothing but suchness appearing. And this is a point that requires further elaboration or clarification. Are they saying that suchness is stained, or what is the relationship between suchness and the stains? And we all know that suchness is not stained by stains. Only stains are stained by stains. But somehow they adhere to suchness from the point of view of a confused mind, which is sort of the whole mystery of this presentation, is that the change only occurs from the perspective of the changer. And from the perspective of suchness, nothing actually changes. The entity of the fundamental change consists of the threefold change of the suchness by virtue of the difference in terms of what this suchness is connected to, and the difference in terms of the results of this threefold fundamental change. Now the three folds, I'm not quite sure exactly what they're referring to, what he's referring to as the threefold. It could be the three mentioned above as the mind appearing as the outer world, and the mind is appearing as sentient beings in the Dharma Dhatu. But the foundation of the fundamental change is non-conceptual wisdom, because it is attained through this foundation. Thus, in the Dharma Dharmata Vibhanga and the Dharma Dharmata Vibhanga Vritti, which is the commentary by Vasubandhu, both the temporary and the final fundamental changes refer to suchness having been purified to certain degrees, and completely so, respectively. So first, the temporary change is a partial purification, and the final change is the complete. Thus, the manifestation of pure suchness is, strictly speaking, only the result of the fundamental change, not the actual process of the fundamental change. As for the flaws, if there were no such fundamental change, Vasubandhu says, without a support, due to there being no fundamental change, how could abiding in the nature of phenomena in which henceforth afflictions do not arise operate? If there were no change, how could there be a state in which there were no afflictions? Therefore, just as with the support for the afflictions operating, there must be a support for their not operating, which is basically repeating the logic of the Four Noble Truths, which were, because suffering has a cause, therefore cessation is possible by eliminating the cause. Therefore, just as with the support for the afflictions operating, I read that. Otherwise, I read that too. Likewise, just as contaminated consciousness operates with a support, the alaya vijnana, its remedy must also do so with a support. Therefore, without such a support, there's the flaw of there being no support for engaging in the path. Meaning, if you say there is no sort of support or foundation for the transformation of enlightenment, then there's no point in practicing the path. Furthermore, for example, in the case of a person in samsara, the skandhas are designated as being in samsara. Likewise, there must be a basis for designating the persons who have passed into parinirvana, which is treading on thin ice, right? Because the Buddha never was willing to talk about what happens after the parinirvana, after passing away. First, it is not tenable that mind is this basis because the ceasing of the antagonistic factors and the arising of their remedies is simultaneous. So, in other words, the mind, as the defiled mind ceases, as the remedies are applied, and also because these two contrary phenomena, which would mean mind, presumably would mean the basis for persons who are in samsara and those who are not. And also because two contrary phenomena within the same support are untenable. Just as a cold and a warm sensation are untenable within the same support. That's interesting. So let's one more time. First, it is not tenable that mind is the basis for designating the persons who have passed into nirvana, because the ceasing of antagonistic factors, i.e. defilements, and the arising of their remedies, i.e. the path, is simultaneous. So that mind, I guess, of samsara would not be tenable as the mind of nirvana. And also because two contradictory phenomena within the same support are untenable. I guess meaning that samsara and nirvana within the same mind are not tenable, just as cold and warm. In addition, there must be the basis for designating persons who have passed into nirvana, because there would be no basis for such a designation once a samsaric person has passed into nirvana without any remainder of the skandhas. Therefore, there must be a basis for designating the persons who have passed into nirvana that corresponds to the skandhas as the basis for designating persons in samsara. Which is sort of odd because the Buddha was pretty adamant about not talking about there being any basis for designation of in any way of persons who have passed away into nirvana.
Is there a reason why saying passed into nirvana instead of achieving nirvana?
Well, it could be, if he's being really technical, then you can't like achieve nirvana. You
True. Yeah.
you know, but I'm not sure if that's actually the intent. Partially it's just like a common phrase that was used in the earlier tradition, passing into nirvana, which was sort of a way of saying that somebody achieved enlightenment without talking about what happens afterwards. The fourth flaw is the flaw of there being no basis for designating the difference between the three types of enlightenment of Shravaka, Pratyeka, Buddha, and Bodhisattva. Therefore, the fundamental change that functions as the entity that is such a basis exists. Sort of like reasserting the non-associated phenomena, the non-associated mental factors as having a sort of reality status. As for the fundamental change referring to the revelation of unchanging suchness, upon its merely being freed from adventitious stains. So the fundamental change refers to the revelation of unchanging suchness simply by the removal of adventitious stains without any transformation of anything into anything else. Vasubandhu says, When something has undergone this fundamental change, it has changed into something else. Consequently, how is what has undergone the fundamental change not something that is altered? Which is a boo-boo, right? It's a no-no. Therefore, Maitreya says that the manner in which there is a fundamental change without it referring to something that is altered is established through examples. So he's going to give these examples of phenomena that seem to change but really don't. Examples for this fundamental change are space, gold, water, and so on. For example, space is always nothing but pure by nature. It is only by virtue of its being associated with adventitious fog and so on that this purity is not realized, but it is seen to be pure by virtue of eventually becoming free from such adventitious obscurations. Since it is not the case that impure space becomes pure, it is not that its being pure arises newly. So nothing actually changes, since it is not the case that impure space becomes pure. It is not that its being pure newly arises. Rather, it is just that its purity is observed by virtue of its being free from causes for not observing it. It's free from those phenomena that obscured it, which implies like um, it is observable by somebody else instead of by the sort of the one who has suchness. But that would be not supportable either. It is also not that one should claim space to be something that is altered through its being observed as being utterly pure. In the same way, gold too solely remains in its state of being immaculate. It is just not observed as immaculate by virtue of its being covered over by adventitious stains, but it's observed as being immaculate by virtue of eventually becoming free from such stains. It's also not that its being immaculate has arisen by virtue of this observation or observing. Likewise, water always remains totally clear. It is just not observed as being clear by virtue of this water being associated with earth's substances, but it is observed as being clear by virtue of being free from those earth's substances. And it's also not the case that by virtue of observing its clarity, this clarity has arisen in such a way that it has not been present before in the substance of water that represents a continuous stream of individual moments. Nor is it that one should claim the substance of water to be something that is altered through its being observed as being clear. In the same way, in the fundamental change too, natural luminosity is not something that did not exist before, but it does just not appear by virtue of adventitious stains appearing. This is just as with space, gold, and water respectively appearing to be impure, not immaculate, and turbid. By virtue of being free from these adventitious stains, natural luminosity appears. However, it is not that it arises in such a way that it has not been present before, by virtue of the appearance of an alteration due to the nature of phenomena entailing such an alteration. Since there is no such alteration, the nature of phenomena and the fundamental change that is constituted by it are permanent. Here, the fundamental change of the nature of phenomena is taught through the examples of gold and water as being congruent with their properties only in terms of their qualities, without considering their respective material substances. Through the experience of space, however, it is taught in its entirety. So the first these two examples of gold and water don't completely describe the situation, because they remain as being material substances, whereas space is the more appropriate analogy, because space is not anything at all, which is the nature of suchness. Through the phrase and so on, other similar such kinds of examples are to be understood as being appropriate to, such as cloth and so on, remaining in the state of being clean, though having become free from stains. Another famous example that when clothes get dirty, the cloth isn't actually dirty, but somehow dirt has adhered to the cloth, and we clean the dirt, not the cloth. Okay, so now we skip to non-conceptual wisdom on page 132. But actually, before doing that, I wanted to just read the section titles to us of this presentation that Karl Brunholzl gives to show the diversity of texts that he surveys in this survey of this topic of fundamental change in the Mahayana tradition. Just to get a feeling for how all pervasive this concept is in the literature. So first he went through the Abhidharma and the Vinaya, and not quite sure why he includes the Vinaya. It's mostly in the Abhidharma. He talks about it in the Yogacara Bhumi, which is a compilation by a sangha of many different texts, many of which are usually are of disputable authorship, meaning that Western scholars believe many of the texts in the Yogacara Bhumi, which is this massive accumulation of like 17 volumes or something, are not by a sangha. And then we have the complete turning about, the Ashraya Parivritti in the Ornament of the Mahayana Sutras by Maitreya, another text by the future Buddha. And we have the same topic as it appears in let's see, the text we just did, Dharma Dharmatava Bhanga, also in Maitreya's Uttara Tantra, and in Sangha's Abhidharma Samuchaya, his compendium of Abhidharma of the Mahayana tradition, the Mahayana Sangha's compendium of Mahayana Samgraha, which is another text that Karl has focused on as being a key Mahayana text, and he's come out with a 3-volume trilogy on that text of translations of commentaries on it, along with his usual massive notes and introduction. Then we have Ashraya Parivritti in the Trimshika Karika, which is the famous 30 verses by Vasubandhu, is a text by Vasubandhu that is considered by many to be like the core text of the Chittamatra tradition. Talks about the Alaya Vijnana and the different aspects, the 3 different aspects of the Alaya Vijnana in terms of storehouse, of past activity, and the matrix for giving birth to future activity, and what is the third one? The sort of structure that it creates, meaning the structure of the 5 skandhas, the 8 consciousnesses, I believe is the third. Ashraya Parivritti in Maitreya's Madhyanta Vibhaga, the differentiation of middle and extremes, and its commentary by a gentleman named Stiramati, and then in Ashraya Parivritti in a text by Ratnakara Shanti called The Teaching on Prajnaparamita, Prajnaparamitopadesha, and his Kasama Namatika, I'm not familiar with that text, but that text by Ratnakar Shanti is the last one of the main, like 5 texts on the Shamatha Vipassana that has yet to be translated into English. And then let's see, a couple of other obscure texts, and then in Nagarjuna's praise to Dharmadhatu, the turning about, Ashwaya Parvati, and another obscure text, and then in various Madhyamaka texts. The commentary on the Madhyamaka Avatara, and then in various Tibetan commentaries on the Dharma Dharmatava Banga, which Carl does a thorough perusal of in another part of this introduction. But here he dives into the aspect of the turning about that appears in those commentaries, and then the conclusion. And I think I meant to include the conclusion. No, the conclusion is huge. How come I didn't do that? Oh, I missed that. Did I assign 126? Shoot. Yeah, the conclusion of Ashraya Parvati. 127. Good. Okay, so 127. As the variety of the above descriptions of the notion of fundamental change show, there's a development of this concept in Buddhist texts, ranging from a simple replacement of a defiled psychological structure with a purified psychological structure, through entirely mental forms of fundamental change, on the one hand, to the mere revelation of the primordially existing ultimate nature of the mind. So no actual change, but just a revealing of the true nature um, of that primordially existing ultimate nature of the mind, through the change that consists of simply recognizing the adventitious nature of the stains or the coverings that seem to have obscured it, without any actual change or replacement of anything by anything. As illustrated by the text presented above, the foundation in the term fundamental change may refer to the body, whole list of things, the entirety of one's psychophysical existence, i.e. Atma Bhava. Interesting Sanskrit term. Atma is the self, or the and sort of oneself, and then Bhava is the existence or the being, one's individual being. The 5 skandhas, the physical and or mental impregnations of negative tendencies, the 6 inner ayatanas, the impure or afflicted dependent nature, from among the 3 natures of the Yogacara, of the imaginary, the dependent, and the perfectly consummate. There's a tradition of dividing the dependent nature into impure and pure dependent nature. And so in that situation, the impure dependent nature is affiliated with the foundation of the fundamental change. The impure elements of the mind stream, another way that it's characterized, suchness, emptiness, the nature of phenomena of the Dharmadhatu. So it ranges from sort of negative or samsaric phenomena to nirvana, enlightened, ultimate phenomena. Suchness, emptiness, the nature of phenomena, the Dharmadhatu, non-conceptual wisdom, the nature of the mind, Tathagata Garbha. Change may refer to the removal of something, either the removal of something in something, or the removal of this very something. So either like you take the batteries out of the obstructions or you remove the obstructions entirely. Um, and it's being explicitly or implicitly replaced by something else, the purification of something, the change of something into something else, the revealing of something without any change within this something through merely eliminating what obscured it, or the very foundation within which any of the above changes take place, but which remains changeless itself. Thus, the outcome of this process may be something entirely new, a new form of something pre-existing, may be entirely new, or a new form of something previously existing, or the unobscured manifestation of what existed primordially. I might have added an extra or there. So it's good to have two oars in the boat, one for each side. Though some texts do not explicitly specify the result of the fundamental change, others identify it in many different ways, such as the purified dependent nature, the pure elements of the mind stream, stainless suchness, purified emptiness, the uncontaminated Dharma Dhatu, the Dharmakaya, all kinds of masteries over phenomena, wisdom, and so on, or the Tathagata Garbha endowed with twofold purity. And the twofold purity is the natural purity or naturally pure, and that which is pure of adventitious stain. So we see this phrase here and there, and it refers to two types of purity of the Tathagata Garbha. One is that Tathagata Garbha is already pure, and that secondly, Tathagata Garbha uh, can become pure of adventitious stains by the virtue of the path, resulting in enlightenment. And so then the naturally pure Dharma, Tathagata Garbha, becomes evident. And interestingly, the identification runs from the, the pure dependent nature, which is clearly not an ultimate phenomena, to the Tathagata Garbha. So it again has this huge span. According to Paramarta's translations and works preserved only in Chinese. So Paramarta was a early first millennium Mahayana teacher who went to China, spent many years, the rest of his life in China, teaching and translating texts. And so he brought with him the understanding that was prevalent in his part of the Buddhist tradition in India at that time, and wrote a couple of texts that are sort of fundamental in creating what we now know as Chinese Buddhism. Chinese Buddhism is heavily influenced by Yogacara throughout. Um, let's see, according to Paramarta, the fundamental change refers to the change of the Alaya consciousness into the pure consciousness, using the term Amala Vijnana. Instead of Alaya Vijnana, storehouse consciousness, Amala Vijnana is pure consciousness, consciousness that is pure. In someone, the Ashraya and Ashraya Parivriti, so the base or foundation in the term, the turning about of the foundation, is the psychophysical continuum of an ordinary being, or the Alaya consciousness, also both of those being sort of samsaric phenomena. It is to be removed and replaced by something else. But when the basis refers to the nature of phenomena or the Buddha nature, something ultimate, it is to be revealed and not replaced, of course. However, with Schmidhausen, who was an early Mahayana master of the first millennium in India, just kidding. Just seeing if you're paying attention, any of you at all. Who was Schmidhausen? He was some German guy in like the 19th or 20th century. One could also say that the purification of suchness and so on as ashraya, as the basis, is only a special case of Ashraya Parivritti's general principle of eliminating afflictions or impurities, that is, one in which the nature of what changes, suchness and so on, is not affected, while what seems to be removed are only adventitious things that never really existed in the first place. It's funny that he says one in which the nature of what changes, indicating that suchness does change. Right? Thus, while some Yogacara texts still refer to a process of non-conceptual wisdom and/or the qualities of the Dharmakaya being developed or gradually increasing along the path, others speak clearly about merely revealing what has always been present as ultimate reality. Despite their great variety, all these descriptions of the fundamental change entail both a negative aspect, relinquishment, and a positive aspect, attainment or purity. Thus usually designating both a process and its outcome, which is the way that the term Buddha is translated into Tibetan as two terms: purification or relinquishment, and uh, expansion or blossoming. Despite the great variety of all these descriptions, sorry, I just read that. Let's see. By keeping in mind that the term fundamental change is used in Yogačara's text sometimes to refer more to the first and sometimes more to the second, many seeming contradictions in their different ways of describing or applying this term can be resolved. All of this also shows that the most common translation of Ashraya Parivritti, or transformation of the basis, may be appropriate in some certain cases, but as far as unchanging suchness, dharmadhatu, natural purity, but our nature, or the luminous nature of mind are concerned. The whole point of the notion of fundamental change is that there is absolutely no transformation of anything into anything else. So there's two types of change. There's actual change, in which things actually change, and then there's fundamental change, in which nothing changes. Typical Buddhist mumbo jumbo, contradictory terminology of change is no change. And then there's change comes from within and things like that. Rather, the revelation of mind's primordial pure state, from which the perspective of the path appears as fruition alignment, only manifests as a change from the perspective of deluded mind seeming to be obscured before and then unobscured later. This is definitely the meaning of fundamental change in the Dharmadharmatavibhanga, the Uttara Tantra, and others of the above works that I just listed. As explained there, this kind of fundamental change does not refer to any change in nature, just as the sun first being covered by clouds and then being free from clouds would not be called a transformation of the clouds into the sun, or even any transformation of the sun itself. It is solely from the perspective of those who watch the sun that its state seems to have changed in terms of first being with and then being without clouds. So I think part of the exercise of this whole text, studying this text and this course, is like, why are they making such a big deal out of this? It's a fairly simple point, right? That enlightenment occurs by the clearing away of obscurations that conceal the true nature of the mind or reality, and that true nature doesn't actually change. Anyway, they like to draw things out, I guess, be dramatic. It's solely from the perspective of those who watch the sun that its state seems to have changed. It's clear that the presence or absence of clouds does not affect the nature of the sun in any way. Just our perception of facts for the sun itself is not even a question of whether it has transformed or changed, let alone how. Imagine the sun like caring if there are clouds on planet Earth or not. Like all the different phenomena that the sun uh, lights up. In this vein, Mahayana Suchalamkar states, though without difference between before and after, it is immaculate in terms of all obscurations, being neither pure nor impure. Suchness is held to be Buddhahood. And then there's this famous quote that, let's see, as it was before, so it is after, from the Uttara Tantra. Stirmati's commentary explains the unchanging nature of suchness as the emptiness that is always empty and naturally luminous, be it at the time of being an ordinary person or a Buddha. The removal of adventitious stains is adventitious as these stains themselves. Purity is said to mean having the nature being afflicted before, and then the stains having become non-existent later. So having cultivated the path with before referring to the time of an ordinary being, later to the time of full Buddhahood. But the Dharmakaya of a Buddha is held to be of the nature of suchness, emptiness. Emptiness has the nature of being empty and naturally luminous, even at the time of ordinary beings. Also later, at the time of full Buddhahood, it has the nature of being empty and natural luminous. Therefore, it is in its nature of purity, there is no difference. But since there is nothing to be purified in that nature, it is not pure. It's not really pure because there was nothing to be purified. That's a good one. Nevertheless, at the time of fully perfect Buddhahood, through the power of having cultivated the path and the adventitious stains, afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations, the two obscurations, those adventitious stains become non-existent. Thus, since suchness becomes pure later, this is the meaning of not being pure, impure either.
Could I
Any
ask
more?
a question?
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so regarding when you were sort of asking, like, why do they make such a big deal out of this point and, beat it into our heads? So I have two thoughts on that. One is a question, which is, are there any differences of view across the schools about this subject?
There must be earlier texts that imply this, that sort of speak in this in an imprecise way as being like some sort of basis is being purified through the path.
Because
Like,
then, yeah, so then what you just mentioned about imprecise speech was part of my second point, which is more of a comment than a question, which is there's a lot within the teachings that talk about developing qualities and cultivating things. And so there's this kind of pervasive tendency to talk about things that way, which in a way I think could be what leads to this impression that something is being changed. And I've been dealing with this a lot when we've been doing in our deleg studying the four immeasurables and various things. And there's a lot of discussion about this notion of cultivating compassion or developing compassion. And then on the other hand, there's also the view that it's already there. And it's like this little tug of war between how you language it.
yeah.
So I've just thought that, that's why I wondered, are there actually different schools that think differently, or is it more just this, like you said, kind of,
I think it's the language, like, I think the phrase cultivating the roots of virtue, like the accumulation of merit and wisdom, that phrase in itself, I think, is like sums up the imprecise way of talking about the process of the path and enlightenment. And like through the accumulation, we were able to achieve enlightenment. And without that accumulation, our basic nature is not enlightened somehow. So, and then the early versions, like we saw last week, of how the Alaya Vijnana is referred to in different ways. In some texts, it's referred early on. It's like Buddha nature. as well as the eighth consciousness. So there's like this turning about of it going from one thing to another. So there is this the early language around Buddha nature had a very imprecise way of describing things, as if something turned into something else. In that case, it was the eighth consciousness turned into Buddha nature. So how could that, when you really look at it, how could that possibly be? How could Buddha nature be produced?
So, do you think that what happened was that people talked about it that way, and then the people who maybe are more have that more logical approach
The Madhyamakas complained and said,
would,
"Yeah, like you
yeah,
guys, there's no way that can happen. Nothing changes. Buddhahood. If you say that Buddhahood is like something that's brought about as a change, then it is going to change again. So
so
you
the
guys are
sticklers for
lost."
logic and accuracy.
Yeah, push them to like then. We see this happen over and over again in the Buddhist tradition, where earlier things are like presented in an imprecise way and effectively, clearly, like at the time it was effective, and then later they have to get more precise about the language. What is emptiness? What is Buddhahood? What is enlightenment? All
And
sorts
yet
of things.
the funny thing is it's still going on now because it's like if if it had gotten established, and obviously it was established long ago when they wrote all this stuff, that there's no change, and yet people still talk about change. Like as I mentioned in this study that we're doing, and I'm pulling out articles of all kinds, to share and discuss, and like the last ones, some of them were from the Dalai Lama, and he was saying, talking all about, I do believe it is possible for people to change, and going on and on. And so, we basically got right to the heart of this, talking about on one hand, he's talking about change, and on the other hand, the same, sometimes even in the same articles, and sometimes other ones, there's the very clear notion that it's already there. It's all already there. So it's not even,
It's rampant today. Basically, you can look at any presentation on Buddha nature, almost any, and like everybody universally talks about how we purify our Buddha nature. We all have Buddha nature implicit in us or innate within us, but it's not pure. It's not fully developed. And through the path, we develop it until finally it blossoms into true Buddhahood.
yeah, so we can't
And
even argue that it was sort of like a progression from a
right,
more
and now it's
primitive
over.
language, and then it got cleaned up because it's still not cleaned up, in that sense.
Totally.
The language is still very conflicting and imprecise.
Totally, yeah. When we did this course on this Buddha nature text by Mipam Rinpoche a few years ago, we saw that uh, where he was doing the same sort of thing of like talking endlessly about how people constantly mischaracterize Buddha nature, and and it was very difficult to like pinpoint, well, what's the correct way of understanding it, because he kept saying, if you think of it this way, that's wrong. If you think of it that way, if it's wrong. If you think of it the other way, it's wrong. If you think about it, it's wrong. Yeah. So a repeating diatribe. So let's see, we're on the bottom of 129, I think. A quote from the Ornament of Mahayana Sutras, which is compiled by Maitreya. When murky water becomes clear, its transparency does not arise from elsewhere, but is just its becoming free from pollution. The same goes for the purity of your own mind. It is held that mind, which is always naturally luminous, is only blemished by adventitious flaws. It is stated that there is no other mind apart from the naturally luminous mind of Dharmata. Even right there, we see the same. There's no other mind apart from the ultimate mind. And we see all these other statements of saying, like, well, there's deluded mind. That famous quote from the Prajnaparamita Sutras, mind is empty. and they're talking about deluded mind. Mind is defiled. Mind is naturally luminous. There's
And
two types
sometimes
of minds.
don't they sometimes even kind of use mind only to talk about the diluted aspect, and that it's not that.
Yeah, then they use a different term. Very unclear, imprecise in their language, the use of the word mind. Stiramati, who is one of the main commentators on Vasubandhu and the works that Vasubandhu comments on, so he writes like sub-commentaries, comments that what is referred to as murky water having become pure means nothing but that its primordially existing natural transparency appears upon having become separated from adventitious pollutions, which is very subtly implying that when you remove the pollutants, then something does like happen. It like the luminosity becomes more luminous or something, right? Isn't there that subtle? Its primordially existing natural luminosity appears. Well, I guess just
I
appears,
don't
but
think it's. I mean, it's just like when you mentioned cloth, and cloth
yeah.
washed.
In other words, water never has the nature of pollution, but it is naturally clear and transparent. Likewise, naturally pure mind is said to have become pure upon being freed from adventitious stains. Naturally pure luminous mind covered by adventitious stains is like a pure crystal. When covered by mud, its purity is not seen. Naturally pure mind refers to the non-dual dharmata of the mind. That is the perfect nature, whereas any other kinds of mind, the minds that represent the dependent nature, are not explained to be pure mind, for dependent minds are always stained by the afflictions and other mental factors, rather, and they also arise and cease momentarily. Therefore, they are not suitable as naturally luminous mind. On the other hand, the perfect nature is said to be naturally luminous because it is not stained by samsaric contaminations and does not arise and cease momentarily. Thus, naturally pure luminous mind refers to the suchness of mind. So the phrase "the suchness of mind" im- implies like there's two qualities of mind. There's the delusions of mind. That mind contains delusions and it also contains suchness. That's a tricky phrase. Furthermore, I mean, Yogacara texts speak about change in terms of the eight consciousnesses or adventitious states. They usually do not refer to a real change, since all these consciousnesses or states are typically explained to be delusive and illusion-like, and thus actually non-existent in the first place. So why do they talk about um, the only change is the realization of exactly this fact. Thus, there's actually no change in terms of the object, but only in terms of the realizing subject, which again happens only from the perspective of the seemingly evolving wisdom of the path, but not in terms of the fundamentally unchanging nature of non-conceptual wisdom. So the only thing that happens along the path is that we gain the ability to see more clearly what has always been there from the beginning. Let's see. Therefore, at any given time in the path, there is never any change in substance or nature, both on the side of what is to be relinquished and on the side of what is to be attained. All that happens is a cognitive change or a change in one's outlook on oneself and the world. Thus, there is only a revelation of the way things actually have always been once the delusion of what is projected onto it is seen through. In addition, non-conceptual wisdom is both the underlying foundation and the result of this fundamental change. Is clearly described in terms of the dynamics of an enlightened mind and not a sheer emptiness or an inert state. Consequently, as far as the notion of fundamental change refers to this process of uncovering mind's fundamental nature, even when it is sometimes described in Buddhist texts as if there were a transformation of one entity into another, that's not what they mean. Or of something impure, such as the skandhas and mental afflictions, into something pure, such as the pure skandhas or wisdoms. The pure skandhas. That's interesting. This is just a conventional or expedient way of teaching, as the Eighth Karmapa's commentary on the Abhisamaya Alamkara says. Those present-day followers of Mahamudra, whose confusion is even 100,000 times bigger than this, he's got quite a beef about this, doesn't he? They exclaim, through refining the Alaya consciousness into something pure, it turns into the result of mirror-like wisdom. Right? We see this all the time when we talk about the five wisdoms. We're like, this transforms into this. This changes into that. This is not justified for the following reasons. One, something like this does not appear in any of the traditions of the Mahayana. Two, and what does not appear there also does not appear in the sense of something that is obtained through reasoning. Two, a presentation of the Ali consciousness as the cause and mirror-like wisdom as its result is not something that is obtained through reasoning. Rather, with respect to the mode of being of causes and results in terms of such causes and results in the Abhidharma that actually fulfill these functions, that is, what produces and what is produced, the Ali consciousness and mirror-like wisdom are not adequate as a cause and a result that fully qualify as such. Also, since the very nature of the Ali consciousness is nothing but the adventitious stains, it is presented as impure. No matter how it may be refined by something else, it will not turn into something pure. It is not possible within the sphere of noble objects that something impure turns into something pure, or that something pure turns into something impure, because things cannot change. Which is so weird, because cause and effect is all about change, right? But how, if the Ali Vijnana and the suchness are present at the same time, how can one be the cause of the other if the result is already there? This also highlights the two reasons why, from the perspective of the path, any fundamental change is possible at all. First, what seems to change, i.e. the adventitious stains, can appear to change precisely because it is merely an unreal and deceiving mental construct in the first place. Secondly, these fictitious mental projections are only superimposed onto and occur nowhere else than within the undeceiving ground of true reality, which is their actual nature, just to be revealed. These fictitious mental projections are only superimposed onto the undeceiving ground of true reality, and they occur nowhere else than within that undeceiving ground of true reality, which is their actual nature, just to be revealed. In other words, just to be revealed is a little odd. In other words, though sentient beings' delusional seeming reality is no beginning, for individual beings it can end. Samsara can end. On the other hand, ultimate reality is neither beginning nor end. Thus, realizing Buddhahood means nothing but to recognize the true nature of the mind, which can never be altered through its opposites, such as the untrue nature of mind, i.e. mistakenness and afflictions. Once the latter are fully seen through and recognized as adventitious illusory phenomena, mind will not revert to them. In other words, unlike water being reheatable over and over again, this was an interesting one, once the nature of mind is known directly for what it is impossible to unknow it. As Dharmakirti says in his Pramanavartika, the nature without adversity, that is actual reality, is not harmed through what is contrary, even with effort, since mind naturally settles in its own sphere. As for when the fundamental change takes place, as seen above, it is mostly explained as happening at midnight. On the Buddha Bhumi. However, Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, blah blah blah, and the Bodhisattva Bhumi say that the first occurrence of the fundamental change is on the first Bhumi, while the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara Bhashya, the commentary on it, on blah blah blah, also relates the fundamental change to the path of familiarization. So where does the change occur? Thus, in a more general sense, as also the Mahayana Sutra law occurs above verses on the fundamental change of all eight consciousnesses on different bhumis show. So there was, when he went through the concept of change in the Mahayana Sutra Alamkar, there's a section where there's a correlation of the changing of the eight consciousnesses to the eight first bhumis. The notion of fundamental change can be understood as a continuous process throughout the 10 bhumis that culminates in the attainment of Buddha as the final fundamental change, one more notch. What is common to every level of this process is that the respective changes are irreversible, though they are further enhanced and expanded up to the Buddha bhumi. Non-conceptual wisdom. The above discussion of fundamental change on a variety of texts already included a number of explanations on non-conceptual wisdom, but the primary Indian Buddhist texts that systematically discuss this topic are the Dharmadharmatavibhanga and the Mahayana Sutra Samgraha, the Compendium of Mahayana by Asanga. Thus, the following presentation, non-conceptual wisdom, is not an exhaustive documentation of this topic in Buddhist literature, which is far beyond the scope of the study, but is limited to those two texts and excerpts from commentaries, as well as some additional materials from the blah 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 and the latter's commentary, implying that the earlier presentation of turning about Ashraya Parivrita was an exhaustive documentation of this topic in Buddhist literature. And it really was. He does like an amazing job of surveying Buddhist literature on Shraya Parvata. Anyway, non-conceptual wisdom in our text in general. The DDV, I like that, says that non-conceptual wisdom is the foundation or support of the fundamental change. What is the relationship then between the foundation and the change? This is the sixth point in this text explanation of the fundamental change. However, it is not taken as the foundation that changes or as the result of the fundamental change, which is suchness or the nature of phenomena. So, non-conceptual wisdom is not the foundation that changes, nor is it the result of the change, but it's like what precipitates the change? Well, we'll see. Rather, DDV explains non-conceptual wisdom as being the cause. So non-conceptual wisdom functions as a cause of the fundamental change because the latter is attained through the former. Likewise, GC, which turns out to be his abbreviations for a commentary by Gu Tsongpa on the Dharmadharmatavibhanga. That is also in this book. GC says that the direct cause of the fundamental change is non-conceptual wisdom, which is in turn caused by proper mental engagement. Point 7 of the explanation of the fundamental change in DDV. In detail, non-conceptual wisdom explained through the following 6 points. So it goes through the whole presentation of this topic in the text, sort of stealing the thunder of going through the text at all, because it's so thorough, but here we go. First, the four focal objects of non-conceptual wisdom. So non-conceptual wisdom, focal objects meaning like what does it concern itself with? Consists of the Mahayana's teachings, aspiring for them, gaining certainty about them, and completing the accumulations of merit and wisdom. So those four. So the four objects or the four areas of concern for the development of non-conceptual wisdom are the Mahayana teachings in general, the aspiring for those teachings, or the aspiring for the embodiment or realization of those teachings, the process of gaining certainty about them, which presumably would be a sort of understanding of them in terms of the progression of the path as being one that goes from understanding to experience to realization. And then the completing the accumulations of merit and wisdom would be the process of experiencing and realizing the Mahayana teachings. This means to first rely on spiritual friends who teach the vast and profound Mahayana, such as Karl Brunholzl. Based on that, aspiration for the Dharma taught by them arises, followed by a gaining doubt-free certainty about it, and other spiritual friends like Chogyam Trungpa and so forth. Um, by gaining doubt-free certainty about it through reasonings that are inspired by one's aspiration, and completing the accumulations by way of mentally engaging in a proper manner in the meaning about which one has gained certainty. Is Nundro a way of accumulating the accumulations? I think so. I think Nundro is a very efficient package for accumulating the accumulations. Just saying. However, if one of those four factors is missing, go back to zero. The result of non-conceptual wisdom will not arise. The relinquishment of characteristics to non-conceptual wisdom refers to the four kinds of conceptions about antagonistic factors, warlike factors. Their remedies for those factors, suchness, which is realized through remedying them, and the process of realizing suchness. The antagonist factors consist of the afflictions and the fourfold clinging to impermanent and impertinent sentient beings as being permanent, to what is empty and conditioned as being real, to samsara, which has the nature of the three sufferings as being really existent, and to identityless phenomena as having an entity. The fourfold clinging, that's interesting. So we cling to impermanent sentient beings as being permanent. We cling to what is empty and conditioned as being real, meaning really all phenomena. We cling to samsara as being really existent, and we cling to identityless phenomena like emptiness as if they have something. So clinging to emptiness.
Are these the same as or just similar to the marks?
They're similar to the marks, and it's a scheme that later gets elaborated in the Sakya tradition, in particular, by a famous Sakya master, Sakya Sachen Kunga, or whatever, one of the five early masters of the Sakya, in a text called Parting from the Four Attachments, which Dzongkar Khyentse Rinpoche teaches on occasion, and is published in various places. And it
Right.
goes through a progression of like being attached to this life, being attached to a better rebirth in samsara, being attached to enlightenment, and then being attached to suchness. Is that right? Better life in this life, better future life, better life through Dharma, and a better life, and then suchness or emptiness, the four attachments. Um, Misconceiving, not understanding emptiness properly. And it's an important scheme, and it's interesting to find out that it originates in this text, or maybe in a text before this text, but in this sort of Mahayana area of Maitreya Sangha. So many of the schemes that we receive come from Maitreya Sangha, whereas the Garjana sort of presents the paramitas and emptiness, and doesn't really elaborate, doesn't really come up with more extensive schemes for understanding the paths, interestingly, which is why he's characterized as profound and Asanga as vast. These are characteristics of mistakenness because they cause bondage in samsara. B. The remedies consist of the antidotes for the affliction, such as meditation on repulsiveness as an antidote for desire, and understanding what is conditioned as being impermanent, everything imaginary as being empty, all beings in samsara as not being beyond the three sufferings, and nirvana as being peace because all phenomena are identity-less and free from being mine. And there we have the marks plus Impermanence is the second one. So the first one, and this is interesting, like we get the four marks as starting with impermanence and then suffering and then essencelessness and nirvana is peace or something like that. But when you look at the four truths overcome the four wrong views. And the first wrong view is that there's purity, that the body can be pure, that samsara can be purified, that there can be happiness in samsara. And we see that here. Um, These are the remedies of samsara because they liberate from non-virtue. However, see, if one clings to those factors to be relinquished in the remedies as characteristics, as if they're real things, one will not be liberated since they are without arising and ceasing. They are unconditioned by nature. This is the suchness of all phenomena, which is the ultimate remedy of both antagonistic factors and remedies. It is the focal object of non-conceptual wisdom, but in order for non-conceptual wisdom to arise, any conceptions about this suchness are to be relinquished too. If I was the editor, I would have broken this into numerous paragraphs, by the way. The characteristic of realization refers to conceptions about the cognizing subject of suchness. That is, all realizations on the path to training in and perfecting the qualities and fruition of Buddhahood with its enlightened activity. The first two characteristics of the factors to be relinquished and their remedies are gradually eliminated on the paths of accumulation and preparation. The characteristic of suchness on the seven impure bhumis, and the characteristics of realization, or in other words, the um, imperfect understanding of the characteristic of realization on the three pure bhumis.
Not just paragraphs, but bullet points too.
Yeah, A, B, C, D, like, and like you can see them clearly and like differentiate them. The fourfold correct yogic practice to attain non-conceptual wisdom consists of the four prayogas of observing all phenomena as being nothing other than mere mind, thus not observing any phenomena as external objects, consequently not observing any observer external objects either, and finally observing the suchness that is the unobservability of the duality of apprehender and apprehended. So these 4 points, we see these over and over again. This is like the four types of or stages of Vipassana practice. This is the four, it gets extrapolated into the four yogas, and it becomes the fourfold pointing out in the Mahamudra tradition. And it's also encapsulated in the four ultimate bodhicitta slogans of Atisha: regard all dharmas as dreams. The four prayogas are like higher yogas of observing all phenomena as being nothing other than mere mind. All phenomena, all appearances are mind. Mind is empty, thus not observing any phenomena as external objects is similar to mind is empty, consequently not observing any observer of external objects either. So mind is empty is the second one. And finally, with the order is they don't really have a
It doesn't
fourth
come
one.
out exactly, though, I don't
Doesn't
think.
exactly, yeah. That second one, not observing any phenomena as external. It's more like if you were to add a step to the,
Well, that's really the same as the first.
it seems
First,
the same as the first, doesn't it?
yeah.
It's more like, or it's sort of like where we say in the Mahamudra scheme, all dharmas, all um, all appearances are mind. Mind is empty. Um, and they add in between those, this one adds not observing any phenomena as external objects. Okay, it's similar, it's not exact. These four make up the levels of heat, peak, poised readiness, and the supreme dharma of the path of preparation. So I found this fascinating because I've been quietly obsessed with like every every time you see a description of the path of purification of the path of joining, the second path, they say there's four obscurations that are overcome on this path through the stages of peak, heat, etc. But they don't state what those four obscurations are. Like nowhere. Like so, there's one place in Carl's other books of on the I think it's the Uttara Tantra where he goes through them in a very complicated way. So it's nice that we have them listed here very simply. These make up the four levels of heat, peak, poised readiness is interesting. It's often translated as patience and the supreme dharma of the path of preparation. This is the progressive way in which non-conceptual wisdom is generated in the mind stream because it is easy. Easy. I like that because it's easy to realize that external reference lack a nature of their own, while it's more difficult to realize that the apprehender is unobservable also. Non-conceptual wisdom is defined through three characteristics, resting in the very essence of the nature of phenomena.
Sorry,
Yes,
isn't
ma'am.
that the opposite of what the Mahamudrites say?
It's easy to realize that external reference lack a nature of their own while it's more difficult, right? That's the whole idea of like focusing on the mind first, because
Right.
it's easier to realize the mind's emptiness than it is. I don't know if they say it's easier. They say it's more expedient. Do they actually say easier? It's
I'm not
implied.
sure, but yeah, they kind of suggest that. So is
Yeah,
this actually a difference of opinion, it seems, about
I
which,
guess so. Yeah, like what's easier for you?
yeah, yeah.
I find it easier to go up than down. How about you? I find it easier to go down than it's defined as having three characteristics: resting in the very essence of the nature of a phenomena, resting in it without appearances, and resting in it with appearances. Non-conceptual wisdom abides or rests in the non-dual, inexpressible nature of phenomena as its focal object. So, resting in not observing any characteristics. B, what does not appear for the wisdom, for this wisdom are duality, designation, sense faculties, objects, cognizance, and external world, since all phenomena that appear in these ways are obscurations of non-conceptual wisdom. Thus, if these phenomena do not appear, the nature of phenomena will appear, the true nature. This non-conceptual wisdom cannot be grasped as the duality of apprehender and apprehended because non-duality is its very nature. It cannot be demonstrated through any designations to express it. It is not grounded on the sense faculties. It lacks any appearance of objects such as form. It is not cognizance because it is without anything to be aware of and anything that is aware. It is without base because it is not an entity that is a base. That was a nice presentation. I wonder where he must have lifted this from somewhere in the Dharma Dharma Dhamma.
Except for the last line. What does that last line actually?
It is not cognizance because it's without anything to be aware of and anything that is aware.
No, that one's okay. It's the base one that I'm trying to figure out. Does
It
that?
is without base because it is not an entity that is a base. Because it's without a base because it's not a base.
So it's one of those terrible definitions that uses the same term.
Tautology. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
The manner in which all phenomena appear for non-conceptual wisdom. I thought there were no phenomena. Is that during meditative equipoise, they appear equal to space. Huh. So space appears. Interesting. Since non-conceptual wisdom lacks all characteristic of a cognizing object subject and all clinging to any characteristics, during subsequent attainment, phenomena appear as the union of appearance and emptiness, just like illusions, dreams, and so on, because they are realized to be unreal. In post-meditation, be a child of illusion. The fourfold benefit of non-conceptual wisdom is the attainment of the Dharmakaya, including its enlightened activity by virtue of the ultimate fundamental change, being free from the two obscurations, supreme uncontaminated bliss, beyond all forms of contaminated bliss, due to having attained all Buddha qualities, master over the pure, spontaneous, unmistaken seeing into suchness, and the variety of all noble objects, master over the many ways of teaching as they are appropriate for sentient beings. The first two benefits represent one's own welfare, while the latter two are the welfare of others. And this goes on for a number more pages. Among the fourfold thorough knowledge of non-conceptual wisdom, the knowledge about its being a remedy refers to non-conceptual wisdom remedying the fivefold clinging to what is non-existent, which are clinging to non-existent phenomena and persons as being reference and having an identity. 1 to 2. 3 is clinging to non-existent change, clinging to the rising and ceasing of non-existent phenomena, clinging to the difference between phenomena and the nature of phenomena. 4, because while there is no difference, and 5, clinging to the denial of taking phenomena persons to be utterly non-existent because of denying their their nominal imputed existence, so misunderstanding emptiness is nihilism. The first four clingings are superimpositions. They uh, project onto reality what isn't there because of clinging to what is ultimately non-existent as being existent, while the fifth one represents the denial of the conventional existence of mere appearances. B, the thorough knowledge of the defining characteristics. So this is part 2 of 6. B. Really? What is B? Where is B? Non-conceptual wisdom. And how did we get to B?
You mean as opposed to A, which
Oh,
was
there it is. It's in the
there's
second
an
one
A in the
in
prior
the sixth.
paragraph.
Right. So the fourfold thorough knowledge of A, the knowledge about being a remedy to non-conceptual wisdom, remedying the fivefold clinging. Okay. B. So there's going to be 4 of these, A, B, C, D. The thorough knowledge of the defining characteristic of non-conceptual wisdom refers to the exclusion of 5 misconceptions about what it is. 1. Non-conceptual wisdom is not the total absence of mental engagement. Though the cognitions of small children or someone just being spaced out do not engage in the reference points of worldly conventions, these beings are not liberated through them. That's for sure. It hasn't worked for me. In non-conceptual wisdom's direct scene in the nature of phenomena, all reference points have vanished without any reference point on the object side to engage in anymore. On the subject side, any mental engagement in such reference points naturally subsides. However, this does not mean that this wisdom lacks wakefulness and one-pointed, sharp mindfulness. It is also not without any cognitive capacity and clarity, since it directly realizes the nature of phenomena without any dualistic split into apprehender and apprehended. 2. Nor is non-conceptual wisdom the transcendence of conceptions in the sense of lacking any coarse or subtle conceptual analysis. It's not conceptual wisdom the transcendent in the sense of lacking. Therefore, though all mundane meditative states from the second dhyana of the form realm onward are without such analysis. So when you study the dhyana states, the first one has subtle, coarse and subtle conceptual analysis, and those are dropped in order to achieve the second absorption. Although all meditative states from the second dhyana form onward are without analysis, they lack the qualities of non-conceptual wisdom. 3. Non-conceptual wisdom is not the complete subsiding of conceptions either. Otherwise, being asleep, intoxicated, having faded in meditative absorption cessation would also qualify as non-conceptual wisdom. 4. Nor is non-conceptual wisdom something like inert and unconscious matter which simply lacks conceptions by its very nature. 5. Non-conceptual wisdom is also not the picturing of non-conceptuality. This means that the actual defining characteristic of non-conceptual wisdom is that which observes true reality, unlike in a visual consciousness and so on. The nature of that realization does not involve any variety or multiplicity. Thus, non-conceptuality means completely letting go of all discursiveness and reference points, in particular with regard to true reality, such as trying to pinpoint a certain meditative experience, thinking this is non-conceptuality. Naturally, non-conceptual wisdom does not just mean a state of trying not to think or imagine anything either, or just trying to think, I shall not think. For all such cases are simply subtle thoughts or grasping. In sum, non-conceptualism means not seeing anything to be observed, nor apprehending anything as anything whatsoever. However, this perceptual mode is actually the seeing of the suchness of all phenomena. From the perspective of ordinary beings, non-conceptual wisdom cannot be demonstrated at once in an affirmative manner. Therefore, though its nature is to not conceive anything, though through unerringly realizing that the nature of phenomena is unobservable as anything whatsoever, non-conceptual wisdom does not apprehend it as anything. However, this wisdom is not taught to be non-conceptual by virtue of not cognizing anything at all, or by virtue of a total cessation of cognition. Therefore, though non-conceptual wisdom does not conceive of any reference points at all within the sphere of the basic nature of being unobservable, the appearances of personally experienced wisdom dawn from within. If you believe that, I've got a bridge I want to tell you about. Wow, okay. There was no repetition at all in there, by the way. If it seemed at all repetitious, that was purely my mistake. I seem to have lost my pages. So our time has elapsed. So let us try to remember. We're on page 136, part C, which is 3, the third part of the sixth part of non-conceptual wisdom, which is the last part of the introduction. So we have a couple of, well, he does a survey of the non-conceptual wisdom in other texts, which we're not going to look at. So we have a few pages, 2 pages left, and then next week we'll dive into the actual real McCoy, the book. Comments, questions, suggestions, thoughts, friends, country, friends, relatives, countrymen, something like that. Lend me your ears. Mm. Friends, what is it? Friends, Romans, countrymen? No?
Friends and rogues.
Friends and rogues. Friends in robes. Let us conclude with our dedication of all the vast merit we have accumulated through this process of conceptualizing non-conceptual wisdom. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death from the ocean of samsara. May I free all beings by the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, in the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone, for going through this, and have a wonderful week, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.